Alright, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is going to be one of those videos that I don't like to do, so you guys better take this to your heart. So here's another how-to video, and for everybody that is coming here for this, make sure you check out my other videos because I'm not a how-to channel, and I'm doing this out of the kindness of my heart. So this is going to be all about wiring, okay? So we got Lane here. We're currently doing a GET build on his MK3 SUPRA. A lot of people are wanting to see a GE build from start to finish, which is what I'm doing, because apparently, from what I've heard, everybody likes to start it and then they don't ever finish. So I am doing exactly what I promised, from start to finish, wiring included, and this is going to be pinned to a standalone. And for those of you that have been following me forever, here we go. ECUMASTER, which you can't even tell because he completely covered it with stickers. ECUMASTER is the way I go. I have it in the black or in the white car, and then I also had it in my old Supra, and I had it in my black Evo. Oh, I had it in my RB26 white car also. So it's one of my favorite ECUs, extremely user-friendly, very fun to tune with. Everything's really colorful on the software, so it's really easy to learn. But that aside, everything is going to be pinned to this. I'm going to show you how simple it is, and it's extremely easy. So you're looking at this wiring mess right here. You guys have probably never wired if you're watching this, or if you have, you're just trying to get a refresh. I'm not really too sure. So you probably don't even know what you're looking at when you're looking at this. And I will give you a quick example of how simple this actually is. So you guys did not wire this. You guys don't know what you're looking at. But if you were to take this one wire and you pin it to something and then you pin it to the ECU, you know what that one wire is. And you take a second wire and you do the same thing. Now you got two wires. You know what those two wires are for. And you continue to do that until every sensor is plugged in and every sensor is wired to the ECU, and it will look like this. So if this is factory, and I do like to do, I modify factory harnesses. I could build my own from scratch, but there's already everything ran and everything is already perfect length for the injectors and everything else. It's really simple. This is a GE vvti harness, so factory, they have the crossover intake, so the wiring is a little bit different because TPS sits here, so it's a lot shorter. And as well, the ECU sits up in the front. And you can see that here on this engine, the ECU sits right here in a Lexus, like any of them. They're up here. I mean, not the older versions, but like the IS300 and the GS300 vvti's. They sit up here. So the wiring is a little bit different because you can't just flip this and shove it up underneath the car. Everything has to be completely cut open, and the wiring has to be separated from the ECU, and just everything has to be gone through. So this harness is completely factory. You guys can see just how much there actually is with this. This is completely jam-packed full of wiring. I have done, for the most part, deleted everything that's unnecessary. So basically all your feed controllers, your idle air control valves, we don't run those. Everything is tuned. I tune everything with the throttle body manually. So everything can be tuned and is exactly how it is, but I will be going over all the pinouts, and I will link what you guys can use. There's a really special place for all the Toyota pinouts, ECUs, even connectors inside the cabins. There's a place that I go to look at all that stuff, because not everyone's just going to know what everything is pinned to factory, because this is a stock connector here. There's a lot that's not there, and you guys will see this is one of the main connectors, and it's only the main connector because there's a ground and a power going to it. That's it. The rest of it is basically just bulk crap. So things such as air conditioner and things that will control other portions of the car, everything that's like automatic, because there are things in here that are not necessary for a boosted engine if you guys are trying to go for performance and stuff. Obviously, if you guys are keeping air conditioning and things like that, then of course you guys can leave that stuff in there and pin everything accordingly. But you won't have pins on this ECU that will tell you if they're for air conditioning or not. You will have to use auxiliary inputs, and I think well, these are the pins. Very good. And then I need, where's the pin out sheet? Do you have it still?
It's up there on the shelf.
It's up here. Okay. I have like 100 of these, but this is one of the most important things you can get. There's tons of pictures of these on the internet, and that's normally what I use. Sometimes I'll have these and I'll just go over it with a dry erase marker and cross out everything that I've done. But you guys can see EGT, so that's exhaust gas temp. That's an aftermarket thing, so if you're trying to get your temperatures for your exhaust, so that way you don't overheat your exhaust and overheat your turbos and your cylinders, you can run a temperature sensor. NOx sensors, basically it's stock things on the engines. They're just the one wire with the, they're self-grounded, so they're shielded wiring, I should say. You got your analogs. So analogs are basically anything that are like pressure sensor related. So your fuel pressure sensor, oil pressure sensor, these are things that'll go to your ECU and your ECU will read from them. So your ECU will read your pressure sensors for your oil, coolant temps, your fuel, basically anything you want to be able to monitor without gauges. Coolant temp, wideband output. So these are things, the wideband output is basically, it's like an O2 sensor, except it's not a narrowband, and it's the wideband wired directly to your ECU. There's multiple ways you can do this. So the wideband can be wired directly to the ECU to the exhaust, or you can have a wideband gauge, and then there is actually an auxiliary wire. Typically it's white, and you can wire it into an aux port. It's either aux or analog. Actually, I believe it's an analog port. So you'll wire the white wire to an analog port, and then you can turn it on to be a wideband, so that way the ECU will read from that wideband, but the wideband will just display information to the ECU for it. Cam sync, so this is cam sync number 2. So if you're running a non-vvti engine, like a 2JZ non-vvti or 1JZ non-vvti, they have 2 cam sensors. So you'll have cam sync 1, which is going to go to 1 cam sensor, and then cam sync 2, which will go to 1 sensor. But there's a lot of times that you can just not even install cam sync. You don't even have to install the sensor number 2. You can just use sensor 1 because it's more than enough to send the signals. Since everything reads, since crank and cam read together, the 1 sensor is just fine. Something you can use cam sync 2 for is a pull-up sensor, so that way you can have like launch control, rolling anti-lag. You don't have to run a flyback diode and stuff like that to make your sensors and stuff work for launch control and anti-lag and stuff like that. Your ignition, your primary trigger, that is the sensor to going to your crank. So your primary trigger will be your crank sensor. That is the most important. I'd say it is one of the most important, but it is the one sensor that will make your car not run, period. If you have a cam sensor unplugged, typically it'll try to run on a couple cylinders, but a crank sensor will make it not run at all. And that's one of the issues I'm having with the Evo, is it's having issues, but it's kind of throwing me like it's not the crank sensor. But EGT2, so there's multiple exhaust gas temps. So basically EGT2 will be like if you're running banks. So EGT1 will be for the back 3, EGT2 will be for the front 3, and you'll have them bank and then an average. NOx sensor 2, because on V8s and stuff you'll have 2 sensors, 1 bank and a second bank. Analog is the same thing as your pressure sensors, so you'll be able to read those. TPS, obviously it's just one of the wires to your TPS. Wideband, there's another wiring. So basically these down here, this connector, which you do have the wideband connector I told you to, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we will be wiring a LSU 4.2. The EME Black uses the 4.9. The only difference is the 4.9 will read data faster and send data faster, but everything is really easy. The pin out here, this tells you what these are, and then you take these and then you wire them to this. So whatever this says, you wire them to this. So you'll have a 12 volt and a ground, or just 12 volt, sorry, there won't be a ground. You will not use RCal, you don't have to use that, so basically it'll just be 5 wires. The 12 volt will go to fuse, which I will always run it to my ignition switched power. And then switch power, meaning I share it with my ECU, so that way everything turns on together. Basically, so you got your wideband output, IP, you just match it to that. So your number 6 port will go to your number 13 port on the black connector. So everything on the left is for the black, everything on the right is for the gray. So onward we go. VSS is your vehicle speed sensor. So your speed sensor, whether it's a hub sensor, a trans sensor, a driveshaft sensor, diff sensor, doesn't really matter. It'll be the signal wire that goes to the ECU, and then whatever your other wire is. If it's 3-wire, it'll be a ground and a power, or if it's just 2-wire, one will be just ground, I believe. Cam sync 1, that's your 1 cam sensor. This is the one that you actually need. You run your cam sensor too. So for your ignition coils, you will wire these directly to like 1 through however many cylinders you have. So going from front to back, and ignition coil number 1 will go to ignition coil 1 on the ECU, and the coils are separated between the two. The coils and power and grounds will all be big. They'll be big pins. So I don't know what I did with those pins. I stuck them somewhere. They will all be giant pins. So here's the big ones, and then there are little tiny ones. I always have an issue, and sometimes I accidentally I get mixed up, I get so into it, and I put a small one on the big one, and it doesn't fit into the connector. So they will be 1 in the front, and then they will go in order to back, and they will be in order plugged in. ECU ground, that is a ground that is that's grounded to the chassis. Sensor ground is very important. Now, this is a different kind of ground. You have 2 different kinds of grounds. You'll have a common ground, and then you'll have sensor grounds. Common ground is basically all the grounds on the car. So you'll have a common ground on the engine. This is what you would consider a common ground. So you'll have sensors like your coolant temp and your TPS, oh dang, what else would there be? There's a couple other things. Map sensors, things like that. This ECU has a built-in map, so you don't need that. But these common grounds, as well as your ECU could be grounded, these common grounds are for sensors like that. Your sensor ground is a ground that comes directly from the ECU. It's completely separate, and you want them to be separate because they have to be completely clean of any noise. And noise is anything that will cause an eruption or disruption of signal between your sensors and your ECU. Sensors that use this are going to be your cam and crank sensor, and as well as your mass airflow sensor if you have a MAF, but in this case we're not using a MAF. These are very important. You want to make sure that you are wiring your sensor grounds to your ECU if it calls for it. So right here, this is the crank sensor. Sorry, this is a cam sensor. Cam sensor is mixed with the injectors. So here we go. This is the crank sensor. You can see this is a really important one. It's shielded, just like this one. The shielding is actually supposed to keep noise from coming in, like, you know, frequencies and stuff jumping around through the wiring, so that way you don't get disruption of signal. Coils will cause that issue, you know, just random things. That's why there's a noise canceller, or it's not what, I don't even know. It's a noise filter, and they will be on these. Here it is right here. This is a noise filter. It's just 1 wire. It's like a little ground thing. It's supposed to cancel noise throughout the engine so it runs smooth. So 1 wire from each of these. In my case, I believe it's the blue one. The blue ones are the sensor grounds, and they do come through, and they will come together into 1 ground, and they will get mounted into the ECU into the 1 sensor ground. This ECU only has 1 sensor ground. The EMU black has 2. So in that case, if you're running EMU black, you can separate them and pin them like that. Basically, everything I'm saying here is going to be for a lot of other ECUs. This one was for a oh, damn it, what the heck was it? What? Your other ECU. MS3. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, it's a Megasquirt Pro 3. So these are for that, and it was basically pinned the same, different pins and stuff to crimp. So more analogs, IAT, that's an important one. For the longest time, I never ran IAT. It's you kind of want to have your IAT placed in your intercooler and really close to the throttle body. You don't want to have it right after the intercooler because it's going to be direct cold air, and you don't want to have it after the turbo because this air right here isn't cooled. So basically, as close to the throttle body you can get it, the better. So you'll have to have a hole drilled and a bung welded in, not like the stupid freaking intercooler pipe that was on the Evo. Wideband output, 5-volt supply. This is a very important one. This is going to be a supply that goes basically right now the only sensor that will take this is the TPS, but anything that uses a 5-volt demand, I can't even think of any other ones, but 5-volt supply is going to be one that goes to the TPS, and I believe that's the only one so far. I could be wrong. Power ground, that's another one. You'll have both these power grounds that are just going to be grounded directly to the chassis, and I always ground them out with the same thing, the ECU ground. You can ground the ECU ground to the common ground on the intake. That would be fine also. Just make sure you ground these power grounds. They will ground out to the chassis, because that's where the battery grounds out. Your ignition coils, again, there's your stepper motor, so that's your idle air control valve. If you're keeping those, you'll just have to get the pinouts to those, and you can wire them directly in. The other ones, the other wiring for that will typically be a 12-volt and a ground. More auxiliary ports, so things like you want to plug in switches and stuff like that to run launch control. Injectors are the exact same way. Front to back, same thing as coils. Injector 1 to injector 1, injector 2 to injector 2, and so on. Same thing for the coils. There's some more stepper motors, so if you're got some crazy coil or crazy idle air control valves, like one of the 1JZ ones has like 10 wires on it, it's crazy. More auxiliary ports, injectors, ignition coil, another power ground, 12 volts. This is a 12 volt that is not switched. Okay, I lied to you. That is a 12 volt that's switched, so you want to make sure that turns on with the ignition. Another wideband output, auxiliary 4. This is one auxiliary port you want to make sure you keep switched out. Don't put it on anything else except for your tachometer. So if you want your tachometer to read your RPM, you want to wire your one wire directly to the auxiliary 4 port, and then you'll switch it to tachometer in your ECU. And I will get to that later on. More auxiliary, injectors, and then another power ground. Literally, it is that simple. But holy crap, that's going to be 16 minutes of me just straight talking. So I'm probably going to make this multiple parts. Maybe. Yes, I'm probably going to. That's crazy. I really didn't expect to talk that long about this. So this is a informed version, in depth, of how to pin this out and the correct things. And I'm going to film the next video directly after this, so I want to kind of separate them because sitting through 40 minutes of footage is not really that fun unless you got tons of time. But this is just going to be a video that you guys can sit and listen to, so that way you guys kind of get a better understanding of how these things are wired to the ECU. But yes, stay tuned for the second video, and that's it for this one.